Hello everyone, and welcome to Method's Alpha Guide for the dungeon Black Rook Hold. I'm Chris Potter, and here with me as always is Zerips.
Hey guys! Entering this dungeon, you start off facing a few mobs, plus a patrolling pack. This pack has a few abilities, nothing too major, but your healer needs to be on top of dispelling, else you might get overrun with damage if the pack takes too long. The first cast they have is called Soul Blade. It's basically a bleed effect on a random player, and it stacks, so you need to be interrupting, stunning, and dispelling if the players gets too many stack. If players get too many stack, it does ramp up in damage and they can die pretty fast. The other ability is called Soul Blast, which again is on a random player, and it will do 20% of your max health as damage, so if you've pulled a bit too many mobs, there's a big chance you might wipe, so be careful. The last pack we pull, there's two new mobs, and they have one other ability called Sacrifice Soul. The ability in itself isn't really anything special, but he will channel onto an ally mob and reducing his target's damage taken by 75%, but increases his own damage taken by 200%. So if you want to play this safe, you should focus the mob in order to kill the pack off faster. As you can see in the video, we did pull like 3 packs together, but we managed due to AoE stuns and good interrupts. We continue up the stairs into a room with 3 mobs and sort of a mini boss. The small mobs have the same ability as the packs you've just killed downstairs, but the big one has 2 new abilities that we haven't seen yet. One of them is Spirit Blast, which again will target a random player and does a moderate amount of damage if not interrupted, so you should try and interrupt this as much as possible. The other ability is called Soul Echoes. He'll cast it on a player and give the player a debuff for 10 seconds. And for those 10 seconds, the player will leave behind an echo for every 1 second. These echoes that he leaves behind will do huge amount of damage to anyone standing in them, so you'll want to make sure to cut it out of the group and for your group members to move away from the echoes. Following the corridor, you'll come into a room where there's some spirits floating around, and they'll gather in the middle once you enter the room and the first boss will spawn.
And the first boss is called Amalgam of Souls, and he looks a lot like Lord Maragor from ICC. The boss doesn't have many mechanics, and it's really just a repeat of the spells you've seen on the trash so far, and also a don't stand in front of the boss mechanic. As you engage the boss, you'll want to turn it away from the group to prevent the tank mechanic from hitting other people. The optimal positioning would be to kite the boss to the edge of the room to give you a lot more room for dealing with the rest of the mechanics. The first ability the boss casts is called Swirling Scythe, which throws a scythe towards a player, inflicting damage and knocking back any player who comes into contact with it. Make sure to spread out so that it has less chance of hitting multiple players at once. This is dodgeable, but does come very quickly, so if you want to dodge it, you need to keep an eye out for it and move quickly when you see it coming. The second ability he casts is called Soul Echoes, which is the exact same mechanic as you just had on the mini-boss before the boss. Kite it away from the members in the group, and keep moving until the debuff is over. We thought it was bugged at first since it was only going on our pets, such as the Warlock pet and the DK pet, but eventually it did target a player. We don't think that this mechanic is supposed to go on pets, so when it comes to live, be aware of that and make sure you're ready to have a safe path to kite it. After that, he'll cast his ability called Reap Soul. This is a 180 degrees frontal cleave from the boss, and it will do significant damage to anyone standing in it, and also apply a debuff which increases the damage you take by 20%. So make sure you move behind the boss as he casts this, even as a tank. As you can see in the video, our DK does get hit by it, and if it combos with any other ability, it's almost certain death. Other than that, it's a pretty easy boss. Just move out of the scythes and handle the echoes away from the group.
After boss, we follow the NPCs to the left and into a room which looks a lot like a library. And there's only really one path you can take here, so follow the staircase up. On the stairs, there's a lot of small spiders, which really doesn't do anything, so you can pull a whole lot. Make sure you don't take the first and best corridor on the right, but instead continue up the stairs, and once you move around halfway up, you'll encounter again some small spiders and an even bigger spider. Even though the spider looks more dangerous, it's just as harmless as the small ones, so nothing to worry about. Once you've killed them off, you'll go one step further up the stairs, and here you want to go into the right room. And here there's quite a lot of mobs, and this pack in particular can be really dangerous if you don't either nuke it down fast or interrupt correctly. First off, there's some magicians which will cast Arcane Blitz, which in itself really isn't dangerous. It will do some damage to a targeted player, nothing too major. However, for every successful cast they have, they'll buff themselves with a damage increasing buff by 50% and it stacks. So you'll want to keep them interrupted if they have more than 2 to 3 stacks for them to drop off the buff, or it will eventually one-shot people. The Archers has an ability called Shoot, and it will just target a random player, and you shouldn't really pay much attention to it as it is unavoidable damage. They do however also have a channel called Arrow Barrage, which can be deadly if you don't move out of it. It's indicated by 2 lines creating a cone in front of the archer. The bigger mobs will do a cast called Bone Wrecking Strike, which is basically a shockwave as we know it from the warriors. Your tank will want to keep these faced away from the group and himself move out as they start to cast. The assassins will do an ability called Knife Dance, and it's a lot like the rogue's Fan of Knives, and we didn't really pay much attention to it and it really didn't do any much damage, so you should do the same. The small lads will cast Phase Explosion continuously, and they'll teleport around to player's location and they'll start their cast again. Once they finish their cast, it will do a lot of damage, so if they teleport onto you or near you, you should move away from them. After finishing off that initial pack, you'll continue down the red carpet and down the stairs, and you'll face off mobs, which are basically the same as you've just killed. And here you finish off the 2 packs, and there's gonna spawn some adds, 4 archers and a big commander. Once again, you've seen the abilities before. The archers have the random shoot and the arrow barrage, and the big commander has the stun Bone Breaking Strike. After that, we continue to the right, into another staircase, and you'll once again face off some mobs you've seen before, or at least you've seen the mechanics. Again, there's some archers, and there's a Soul Torn champion, which will have the stun, the Bone Breaking Strike. After that pack, we continue up the stairs, and we get to the second boss. The second boss is called Kur'talos Ravencrest, and it looks like a female version of Illidan. This boss consists of 2 phases. In the first phase, she'll cast Brutal Glaive, which is a targeted spell and it will do minor damage and leave behind a debuff on the targeted player. This debuff will however spread to anyone within 10 yards of the guy getting the debuff, so you'll want to spread out to avoid taking unnecessary damage. Secondly, she'll cast her tank ability called Vengeful Shear, which will deal a significant amount of damage to the tank and leave a debuff on the tank which increases his damage taken by 50% if he fails to use active mitigation. Shortly after, she'll mark 3 people in the group, giving them a debuff called Dark Rush, and after 10 seconds she'll dash to all 3 players, leaving behind a blazing trail that will inflict damage if you stand in it. What you want to do here is to group up on the boss, so you make the trails as small as possible and move the boss away from it afterwards. After some time she'll phase into phase 2, where she'll be floating in the air just outside the balcony. You'll still be able to hit her as a melee, but you should be careful for fire under you. As she transitions, she will fixate a random player with I-beam. The player will simply kite the laser out of the group and make sure not to fill the entire room with it. The debuff it leaves behind is called Fell Blaze Ground, so make sure not to stand in it. She'll also spawn an ad called Rising Vanguard. This mob has the same annoying stun as you've encountered on the trash before called Bone Crushing Strike. And as we know, it's a frontal cone stun, and the tank should simply move away from the group. This mob should however be somewhat ignored at normal difficulty, as the objective is to kill the boss before you run out of room from the laser. So simply let the tank park it in the corner and focus on killing the boss. However, if you are a melee heavy composition, you should kill the ad, because once you've killed it, the boss will land and you'll get into phase 1 again.
Now after you've killed the boss, you'll want to make your way up yet another staircase. And when the staircase becomes blocked off, you need to take the door to the right. In this corridor you'll need to kill some Wrath Guards and some smaller scavenger mobs. The smaller mobs do a fire breath in front of them, so be careful not to stand in front of them, but they also do not turn while they're casting it, so your tank can also move out of them without turning them. The small scavengers will sometimes drink a potion that makes them huge and gives them a damage buff, and while they do look big and scary, it's not really anything to worry about. While making your way further up the stairs, there are some packs with a F.O.O.L guard and bats. They don't really have anything important to worry about, so you can just AoE them down as you normally would. You can see here as we go through the corner, they are so easy in fact that we just decided to pull multiple of them to speed it up a bit. The third boss in the dungeon is called Smash Spite the Hateful. Firstly, throughout the fight, the boss will cast cool F.O.O.L bats, and this calls F.O.O.L bats into assist him, and these simply mark a player, and after a short time they will shoot green slime in their direction. You obviously just want to avoid standing in the green slime, and you can decide where the slime goes if you want to. The boss will call in more and more F.O.O.L bats to assist him throughout the fight. So as you will see at the end of the fight, we just have green lines spawning all over the place. So don't take too long to kill it, or you will end up with the entire room being covered in it. The boss's most frequent ability is Earth-Shaking Stomp. This knocks back all players and deals damage to them. This ability is just annoying to be honest, although it can be deadly if your tank is taking heavy damage and your healer gets knocked out of range or has their big heal interrupt at the wrong time. And the way the tank damage works in this fight is actually kind of interesting. The boss has gone through some changes on the alpha, and at some point he was really deadly to tanks, but it's kind of balanced now, and here's what he does. He has an energy bar that fills up on his damaging melee attacks, and he gains more energy depending on the damage he deals to the tank with each attack. When he reaches full energy, he will do a Brutal Haymaker, and this deals a big amount of damage to the tank and gives them a debuff, increasing their damage taken by 100% for 10 seconds. What this means is that if your tank is using his mitigation well, it will take a lot longer before the boss does his Haymaker. As you can see, we almost kill the boss before he even casts his first Brutal Haymaker, and we actually have to stop DPS to allow him to cast it so that we can record it for the video. The funny thing is that Sko was using his big defensive cooldowns in anticipation for the Brutal Haymaker, but of course by using his big defensive cooldowns, the boss was actually hitting less and thus gaining energy slower. This was funny because Sko was using all his CDs, but by the time the boss actually got full energy, they'd fallen off, so your tank should be mindful of that. After you have killed the boss, you'll want to exit through the same way you entered, but instead of heading back to the left, you want to take the stairs off to the right. There are a lot of risen mobs you will need to deal with on the stairs on the way to the last boss, and they are fairly harmless. The most dangerous ability is a leap they'll do, that has a zone on the ground where they'll land, and if you stand in it, you will get stunned. I think one or two of the packs also had the knife dance ability from earlier in the dungeon as well. Finally, you'll find your way up the stairs to the last boss.
And you start the encounter fighting Kur'talos Ravencrest, while another guy called Laticius is standing outside the room casting shadow balls at random targets and occasionally doing Dark Blast. The Dark Blast is the big purple lines on the ground you'll see. These do some damage and knock back anyone standing in them. Ravencrest will only use two abilities in this phase. The first is Unerring Shear. This does some tank damage, but also applies the debuff to the tank, causing them to take damage over time. And this damage over time effect will stack, and this is basically the DPS check for the first phase. He will also throw a glaive at players, going out to the targeted player and then back to the boss, dealing some damage and knocking back anyone it hits in its way. When you've gotten Ravencrest to low health, the fight will get into the second phase, and a big demon called Leonax will land, killing off the guy you were fighting. Now, I'm not too sure on the lore here, but Lord Ravencrest seems to realize he was helping the Legion or something, and in the last dying moments, he will give the group a buff called Legacy of the Ravencrest. This buff gives everyone 300% increased damage, healing and health, so this is a really huge buff. The boss's other abilities obviously get scaled up and does considerably more damage to make up for the buff.
When you phase, your tank should be ready to pick up the demon. As you can see, Syrups was healing and he got healing aggro immediately and got melee'd. And then the boss's Shadowbolt volley instantly killed Syrups off, as he was already at low health. Shadowbolt volley the boss does is not interruptible, and your healer just needs to have everyone at high enough health to survive it. The boss will also spawn these clouds of gas around the room, and anyone standing in one will be put to sleep. The sleep effect will be removed when you take damage or if your healer dispels it, and it does usually just break by itself after a couple of seconds, due to the group damage going on. The clouds do move around and spread a bit, so keep an eye out that it doesn't creep up on you and put you to sleep. The last ability the boss has in this phase is called Dark Obliteration. He will fly up into the air and become unattackable, and he causes these shadowy lines everywhere, similar to the ones that you see at the start of the fight. The Dungeon Journal lists his ability as deadly. However, at the moment on the alpha, you can just stand in them and not die, as it's very undertuned. As you can see here in the video, we do just stand in it to test if it still does the low amount of damage, and indeed it is still pretty harmless. This phase could be quite fun if it was a one-shot ability. Especially with the clouds of gas floating around, trapping you sometimes, it could be a really difficult and exciting phase to do. Anyway, that's it for the last boss. He just repeats those abilities over and over again, and it does take you a while to kill him, even with the 300% increased buff. If you have blood loss in your group, you should save it for the second phase, just so that you don't fall asleep because of this phase taking so long. Eventually you'll kill him, and that is the dungeon complete. We hope you found our guide to Black Rook Hold useful, and we would appreciate it if you could like the video and leave some feedback. That's all for now, guys. Bye!
Bye guys!